The observation deck stretched before me like a crystal window into the void, its transparent walls offering an unobstructed view of the battle unfolding in the star-scattered darkness beyond. I pressed my six-fingered hands against the cool surface, my breathing apparatus whirring softly as it processed the station's atmosphere. As a diplomatic observer from the Zenthari Confederation, I had witnessed countless conflicts across the galaxy, but nothing had prepared me for what I was about to see. The human fleet hung in space like predators waiting to strike. Their ships were angular, brutal things, not the elegant curves and flowing lines that marked advanced civilization, but crude boxes of metal and fire. When I first saw them through our long-range sensors, I had laughed. These creatures, these newcomers to the galactic stage, thought they could challenge the Korthak Empire with such primitive vessels? The Korthak had ruled this sector for 3,000 years. Their bioships were living works of art, grown rather than built, each one a perfect fusion of technology and biology that could adapt to any threat. The largest of their vessels stretched nearly 20 kilometers from tip to tail, its organic hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that spoke of power beyond measure. When the Korthak Armada emerged from hyperspace, it was like watching gods descend from the heavens. Yet here were the humans, arranged in their simple formations, waiting with what could only be described as casual confidence. Their largest ship was perhaps half the size of the smallest Korthak vessel, and their weapons looked like antiques compared to the biocannons that could reshape matter at the molecular level. Admiral Vexthera stood beside me, her four eyes tracking the deployment patterns below. "The humans request parley," she said, her translator rendering her words in perfect galactic standard. "They wish to discuss terms of surrender." I watched as a small human craft detached from their formation. It was painted white and bore symbols I recognized as peaceful intent, though on such a small, boxy vessel, the gesture seemed almost comical. The craft approached the Korthak flagship, and I found myself leaning forward with anticipation. Minutes passed. Then, the small craft turned and began its journey back to the human fleet. As it docked with the lead ship, I noticed something that made my breathing apparatus skip a cycle. The human vessels were moving. Not the grand, sweeping motions of traditional fleet maneuvers, but small, precise adjustments. They were positioning themselves. "What are they doing?" I asked Admiral Vexthera. Her mandibles clicked in. What I had learned was amusement. "Exactly what every inferior species does when faced with Korthak might," she said. "They are preparing to die with whatever dignity they can manage." But, as I watched more carefully, I began to notice patterns. The human ships weren't simply clustering for a final desperate charge. They were spreading out in formations that seemed almost random, yet something about their positioning nagged at my tactical training. Each vessel was isolated, vulnerable, but somehow the overall arrangement felt purposeful. The Korthak commander apparently grew tired of waiting. The bioships began their advance, their hulls shifting and adapting as they moved. Some grew additional weapon clusters, others extended sensor arrays like flowering buds. It was beautiful and terrible to witness evolution and warfare combined into something that transcended mere violence. The humans waited until the Korthak were nearly within optimal firing range. Then, something extraordinary happened. The human fleet simply vanished. Not into hyperspace. I would have detected the energy signatures. Not behind some form of cloaking that my sensors could have penetrated. They were simply there one moment and gone the next, leaving empty space where their formation had been. Admiral Vexthera's four eyes widened, and, for the first time since I had known her, she seemed genuinely surprised. The Korthak fleet slowed, their bioships extending additional sensory organs to search for their missing enemy. That was when the humans struck. They materialized behind the Korthak formation, not all at once, but in carefully timed waves that suggested a coordination I had not thought possible for such a primitive species. Their weapons fired the moment they appeared, and I saw something that changed everything I thought I knew about warfare. The human projectiles were not energy beams or particle streams. They were physical objects, chunks of metal fired at incredible velocities. Against any other opponent, such weapons would have been laughably obsolete. But the Korthak bioships were designed to adapt to energy weapons, to absorb and redirect various forms of radiation and plasma. They had no defense against simple, brutal kinetic force. The first salvo tore through 3 Korthak vessels before their adaptive hulls could even begin to respond. The bioships writhed as they tried to develop defenses against projectiles that moved faster than their nervous systems could process. By the time they began to adapt, the humans had already adjusted their tactics. The second wave materialized at a different angle, firing different projectiles, some explosive, some designed to fragment, others that seemed to burrow into the bioship's hulls before detonating from within. Each attack was perfectly calculated to exploit the brief window before the Korthak could adapt to the new threat. I found myself pressed against the observation window, my breathing rapid and shallow. This was not the crude bludgeoning I had expected from these newcomers. This was surgical, precise, and utterly ruthless. But what struck me most was not the tactical brilliance or the innovative weapons. It was the way the human crews performed under pressure. Through my instruments, I could monitor communications between their ships, and what I heard defied everything I thought I knew about how species behaved in combat. There was no panic. No desperate pleas for mercy or cries of fear. Instead, I heard calm voices coordinating attacks, reporting damage with clinical precision, and adapting to changing circumstances with a flexibility that seemed impossible for such a young species. When one human ship took a direct hit from a Korthak biocannon, its hull breached and, atmosphere venting into space, the captain's last transmission was not a scream of terror. It was tactical data about the weapon's charging cycle, transmitted clearly and completely before the ship's power failed. The crew of the dying vessel had used their final moments to give their comrades the information needed to avoid a similar fate. The battle continued for 2 standard hours, and, with each passing moment, my understanding of humanity shifted like tectonic plates beneath my consciousness. What had begun as clinical observation became something approaching awe as I witnessed tactics that no military academy in the galaxy had ever conceived. The Korthak bioships possessed adaptive capabilities that had made them nearly invincible for millennia. Their hulls could reshape themselves to deflect energy weapons, their neural networks could learn and counter new threats within minutes, and their organic weapons systems could evolve mid-battle to exploit enemy weaknesses. They were the pinnacle of biological warfare, perfected through countless conflicts. Yet the humans were treating them like a puzzle to be solved rather than an insurmountable force to be feared. When the Korthak adapted to kinetic projectiles by developing impact-absorbing tissue layers, the humans switched to weapons that used the bioship's own adaptive responses against them. They fired projectiles that seemed harmless until the bioships began to adapt, at which point the alien tissue's own evolutionary responses triggered catastrophic cellular breakdown. When the bioships grew additional armor plating, the humans began targeting not the ships themselves, but the gravitational fields around them. Using precisely calibrated gravity bombs, they created localized distortions that tore the massive vessels apart through their own momentum. But it was more than just tactical innovation that held my attention. Through the communication channels I was monitoring, I began to hear something that challenged every assumption my species had made about warfare and civilization. The humans were teaching each other. In the middle of a battle against the most feared military force in the sector, human ship commanders were sharing discoveries, offering suggestions, and building upon each other's innovations in real time. When Captain Martinez discovered that Korthak bioships had a blind spot during their adaptation phases, she didn't hoard that information for her own advantage. She broadcast it to the entire fleet, along with detailed tactical recommendations for exploiting the weakness. When Commander Chen developed a new formation that maximized their gravitational weapons' effectiveness, he immediately shared the pattern with his fellow officers, even though it meant giving up his own tactical edge. This behavior was so alien to my understanding of military doctrine that I initially assumed it was some form of advanced tactical protocol. But, as I listened more closely, I realized something extraordinary: these humans were improvising. They were creating new strategies and sharing them instantly, treating the entire fleet as a single learning organism that became more dangerous with each exchange of information. Admiral Vexthera had gone silent beside me, her 4 eyes tracking the battle with an intensity one had never seen before. When I glanced at her, I noticed that her translator was working overtime, trying to process the rapid exchanges between human ships. "They are not following standard doctrine," she said finally, her voice carrying a note I couldn't identify. "No," I agreed. "They seem to be inventing new doctrine as they fight." The Korthak were beginning to show signs of distress. Their bioships were adapting faster and faster, trying to keep pace with human innovations, but each rapid adaptation was consuming enormous amounts of energy. The organic hulls were beginning to show stress fractures as their cellular structures struggled to keep up with the constant evolutionary pressures. That was when the humans revealed their most devastating weapon: patience. Instead of pressing their advantage, they pulled back. The entire fleet simply withdrew to maximum weapon range and waited. I watched in confusion as the human ships held their positions, making no aggressive moves, while the Korthak bioships writhed in space, their hulls continuing to adapt to threats that were no longer present. "What are they doing?" Admiral Vexthera demanded, though I suspected the question was more for herself than for me. Then, I understood. The bioships couldn't stop adapting. Their evolutionary responses had been triggered so many times in such rapid succession that their biological systems were locked in a feedback loop. They were burning through their energy reserves, adapting to imaginary threats, evolving defenses against attacks that weren't coming. The humans had weaponized the Korthak's greatest strength against them. As I watched, the first bioship began to collapse. Its hull, weakened by constant adaptation cycles, simply couldn't maintain structural integrity any longer. The massive vessel folded in on itself like a dying flower, its bioluminescent patterns flickering and fading as its neural networks overloaded. Within minutes, 6 more bioships had suffered similar fates. The remainder of the Korthak fleet was beginning to show similar signs of stress, their hulls developing irregular bulges and depressions as their adaptation systems fought against themselves. But what happened next would stay with me for the rest of my life. The lead human ship opened a communication channel to the surviving Korthak vessels. I expected demands for surrender, perhaps terms for the enemy's capitulation. Instead, I heard Captain Sarah Morrison's voice, speaking in heavily accented but perfectly understandable Korthak biolinguistic patterns. Korthak Fleet, this is Captain Morrison of the human vessel Defiance. Your bioships are experiencing adaptation cascade failure. We can provide technical assistance to stabilize your biological systems if you stand down immediately. We have no desire to watch your crews die from preventable system failures. The silence that followed seemed to stretch across the entire star system. Admiral Vexthera's mandibles were clicking rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. They are offering to help their enemies, she whispered. I found myself equally stunned. In 3,000 years of galactic history, no species had ever offered aid to an enemy fleet in the middle of active combat. The concept was so foreign that most languages didn't even have words for it. The Korthak commander's response came several minutes later, his biolinguistic patterns showing confusion and wariness. Human Morrison, explain your intentions. This offer defies standard combat doctrine. Captain Morrison's reply was immediate and matter-of-fact. Commander, your crews are not responsible for their leader's decisions to initiate hostilities. We defeated your fleet through tactical superiority, but allowing your people to die from technical failures serves no strategic purpose and violates our ethical principles. Your ethical principles? The Korthak commander's response carried undertones of disbelief. Yes, Commander. We believe that unnecessary death diminishes all sentient species. We will maintain weapons lock on your vessels as a precaution, but our engineering teams are standing by to assist with stabilizing your bioship's adaptation cycles. What followed was perhaps the most surreal moment in recorded military history. Human engineering crews, working through communication channels, began talking Korthak technicians through procedures to stabilize their ship's biological systems. The same humans who had just demonstrated devastating military superiority were now patiently explaining adaptive dampening techniques to save the lives of their enemies. The last bioship stabilized just as the Korthak commander transmitted his fleet's surrender. The surrender ceremonies took place aboard the Korthak flagship, now stabilized thanks to human technical assistance. As a diplomatic observer, I was granted access to witness the proceedings, though I suspected my presence was more for historical documentation than any practical purpose. The Korthak command chamber was a marvel of bioarchitecture, its walls pulsing gently with organic circuitry that processed information at the speed of thought. The air itself seemed alive, filled with microscopic organisms that served as both atmosphere and communication medium. For a species like mine, accustomed to sterile metal corridors, the environment was profoundly unsettling. Captain Morrison entered the chamber flanked by 2 junior officers, all wearing what appeared to be standard environmental suits. Unlike the elaborate ceremonial armor that most species don for such occasions, the human equipment was purely functional, designed for protection and efficiency rather than intimidation or display. Korthak Commander Valtherax waited in the center of the chamber, his massive form supported by biomechanical appendages that interfaced directly with the ship's neural networks. His species was impressive to behold, 3 meters tall with carapace that shifted color according to emotional state, currently displaying the deep purples and blacks that indicated defeat and resignation. Commander Valtherax, Captain Morrison said, her voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix. I want to thank you for your cooperation during the stabilization procedures. Your technical staff showed remarkable professionalism under difficult circumstances.
The Korthak commander's carapace flickered with confusion. You express gratitude to defeated enemies?
I express gratitude to beings who helped prevent unnecessary deaths, Morrison replied.
Your status as former combatants doesn't change that your people acted with honor when lives were at stake.
I found myself leaning forward, fascinated by this exchange. In my experience, surrender ceremonies were exercises in dominance. The victorious species would display their superiority while the defeated acknowledged their inferiority.
This conversation seemed to be following entirely different protocols.
Commander Valtherax gestured with one of his biomechanical appendages, and the chamber's walls displayed what appeared to be tactical recordings from the battle. Human Morrison, explain to me how your species achieved victory against forces that should have been insurmountable.
Captain Morrison studied the displays for several moments before responding. Commander, your bioships represent the pinnacle of adaptive technology.
In single combat or against conventional forces, they would have been virtually invincible.
Yet you defeated us decisively.
We did. But not because we were stronger or more advanced. We won because we approach warfare differently than most species.
The Korthak commander's carapace shifted to display patterns I recognized as intellectual curiosity. Explain this difference.
Morrison gestured to one of her officers, who activated a portable display unit. The device projected tactical diagrams that showed the battle from a human perspective, and, as I studied them, I began to understand something profound about human military doctrine. Most species view warfare as a contest between technologies, Morrison explained. They develop superior weapons, better defenses, more advanced ships, and use these advantages to overwhelm their enemies. This approach has served the galaxy well for thousands of years. She highlighted sections of the tactical display that showed Korthak adaptations during the battle.
Your bioships exemplify this philosophy.
They represent technological superiority taken to its logical extreme, weapons and defenses that can evolve in real time to counter any threat.
Then, how did you counter us? Morrison's expression was thoughtful as she considered her answer. Commander, we don't view warfare as a contest between technologies.
We view it as a contest between minds.
The chamber fell silent except for the gentle pulsing of biocircuits in the walls.
Even Admiral Vexthera, who had accompanied me to observe the proceedings, seemed transfixed by this explanation. Your bioships adapt automatically to external threats, Morrison continued. This is an enormous advantage, but it's also a predictable response.
Once we understood your adaptation patterns, we could manipulate them.
She gestured to her tactical display, showing the sequence of human attacks.
We didn't try to out-technology you.
We studied how you think, how you respond to threats, how your systems process information.
Then, we fed your own responses back to you in ways that turned your strengths into weaknesses. Commander Valtherax's carapace was now displaying rapid color shifts that I recognized as intense cognitive processing. You weaponized our adaptation mechanisms against us. More than that, Morrison said. We turned your entire tactical doctrine into a vulnerability.
Your species has become so dependent on technological superiority that you've forgotten how to fight adaptively at the strategic level.
Your responses are predictable because they're automated.
I realized that my breathing apparatus was working harder than usual as I processed the implications of what I was hearing. The humans had not simply won a battle, they had demonstrated a fundamental flaw in the way advanced civilizations approached conflict. But this explains only our defeat, Commander Valtherax said. It does not explain why you offered aid to stabilize our ships.
Captain Morrison's expression grew more serious. Commander, that decision wasn't tactical. It was ethical. Elaborate.
Human military doctrine is based on a simple principle: the goal of warfare is not to destroy enemies, but to achieve strategic objectives with minimal loss of life on all sides. Once we had achieved our objective, neutralizing the threat your fleet represented, allowing your crews to die would have served no purpose except cruelty.
The Korthak commander was silent for a long moment, his carapace cycling through colors I couldn't identify.
When he finally spoke, his voice carried undertones of something that might have been wonder. In 3,000 years of military history, no species has ever demonstrated such capability combined with such restraint, he said.
How is this possible?
Morrison exchanged glances with her officers before responding.
Commander, human history is filled with warfare.
For thousands of years, we fought each other over territory, resources, ideology, sometimes over concepts so abstract that other species would find them incomprehensible. We learned to be very good at killing each other." She paused, and I noticed that the other humans in the chamber had grown very still. "But we also learned that victory without honor is meaningless, and that today's enemies can become tomorrow's allies if treated with dignity and respect." "You speak of honor and respect for enemies," Commander Valtherax said. "Yet you defeated us with methods that some might consider deceptive."
"Tactical deception is a legitimate part of warfare," Morrison replied.
"But there's a difference between misleading enemy forces and causing unnecessary suffering. We used every advantage we could find to win the battle, but once we had won, continuing to inflict damage would have been wasteful and cruel." I found myself thinking about the implications of what I was witnessing. The humans had not simply defeated a superior force, they had redefined what victory meant.
The formal surrender proceedings concluded with an exchange that defied every protocol in my diplomatic handbook.
Instead of demanding tribute or territorial concessions, Captain Morrison presented Commander Valtherax with what she called a proposal for mutual benefit.
The humans wanted to establish joint research initiatives.
"Your bioship technology represents centuries of advancement in organic engineering," Morrison explained.
"Our tactical and strategic doctrines have evolved through different pressures. By combining these approaches, both our species could benefit enormously."
Commander Valtherax's carapace displayed patterns I had learned indicated deep confusion.
"You wish to share technology with those you have defeated?"
"We wish to learn from beings who have mastered technologies we can barely comprehend," Morrison corrected. "And perhaps we can offer insights that might prove valuable to your people as well." As I observed this unprecedented exchange, Admiral Vexthera leaned close to me and whispered, "This is not how conquest is supposed to work." She was right, of course. Throughout galactic history, conquest followed predictable patterns. Superior forces defeated inferior ones, claimed territory and resources, and absorbed the defeated population as subjects or slaves. The idea of turning military victory into collaborative partnership was so alien that most languages lacked adequate terminology for it. Yet here were the humans, treating their stunning military victory as the opening move in a diplomatic relationship rather than the conclusion of a conflict. Over the following days, I witnessed something that challenged everything I thought I knew about interspecies relations.
Human technical teams worked alongside Korthak engineers, not as masters directing servants, but as colleagues exploring shared problems. The humans displayed genuine fascination with bioship technology, while the Korthak became increasingly intrigued by human tactical flexibility. During one particularly memorable session, I watched a human engineer named Dr. Chen working with a Korthak biotechnician to understand the cellular communication networks that allowed their ships to adapt so rapidly. Instead of demanding access to classified information, Dr. Chen shared human research on neural networks and distributed processing systems, turning the exchange into a genuine collaboration. "Your organic computing systems are remarkable," Dr. Chen said, studying biocircuit samples through a portable microscope. "The processing speed and adaptability far exceed anything we've developed."
"But I noticed they seem designed for specific types of problems." The Korthak technician, whose name translated roughly as growth singer of circuits, gestured with delicate biomechanical appendages. "Our systems excel at pattern recognition and adaptive response. They are less effective at, what is your term, thinking outside established parameters."
"Ah," Dr. Chen nodded.
"That's where human cognitive architecture might offer some interesting possibilities. Our brains are remarkably poor at pattern recognition compared to your biocircuits, but we excel at cognitive flexibility and novel problem solving." What followed was a technical discussion that lasted several hours and culminated in preliminary designs for hybrid computing systems that combined organic processing power with human-style cognitive flexibility. By the end of the session, both species were excited about possibilities neither could have imagined alone. But the most significant moment came when Commander Valtherax requested a private meeting with Captain Morrison. As a diplomatic observer, I was permitted to attend, though I suspected my presence was largely ceremonial. The meeting took place in Morrison's ready room aboard the human ship Defiance. The chamber was spartanly furnished by galactic standards, functional furniture, minimal decoration, everything designed for efficiency rather than impression. Yet somehow the space felt more welcoming than the elaborate staterooms I was accustomed to on diplomatic vessels. Captain Morrison, Commander Valtherax began, his carapace displaying what I recognized as formal colors of significance. "I must understand something that defies my comprehension."
"Of course, Commander."
"Your species achieves total victory over forces that should have been insurmountable.
You demonstrated tactical and strategic capabilities that render conventional military doctrine obsolete.
Yet instead of claiming the privileges of conquest, you offer partnership and mutual benefit. Why? Morrison was quiet for several moments, staring out the ready room's viewport at the stars beyond. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that suggested she was drawing on experiences far beyond this single encounter. "Commander, let me tell you about a period in human history we call the Great Wars," she said. "For approximately 50 years, our species engaged in global conflicts that consumed entire continents. We developed weapons that could destroy cities, tactics that could devastate entire populations, and strategies that threatened to render our planet uninhabitable." She turned to face Commander Valtherax directly. "We became very, very good at destroying our enemies. So good that we nearly destroyed ourselves in the process." The Korthak commander's carapace shifted to deep purples that indicated he was processing complex emotional information. "You learned that victory could be purchased at too high a price."
"More than that," Morrison said. "We learned that the goal of warfare isn't to destroy your enemies, it's to create a situation where warfare is no longer necessary." She gestured toward the viewport, where both human and Korthak ships could be seen working together on joint projects. "Every species we've encountered in this galaxy seems to view military conflict as an end in itself. The strong defeat the weak, claim their resources, and the cycle continues. But that approach ensures that warfare never actually ends." "You suggest an alternative?" "We practice an alternative," Morrison corrected. "We fight to win, but we win in order to build something better than what existed before the conflict began." Commander Valtherax was silent for a long time, his carapace cycling through colors I couldn't interpret. Finally, he spoke. "Captain Morrison, I have commanded bioships for 40 standard years. In that time, I have overseen the conquest of 17 star systems and the subjugation of 9 separate species. I believed I understood the nature of warfare and the patterns of galactic civilization." He paused, and his carapace shifted to patterns that somehow conveyed profound uncertainty. "Your species has rendered that understanding meaningless. You have demonstrated that everything we thought we knew about military power and political dominance was based on assumptions that you do not share." Morrison nodded slowly. "Commander, human military doctrine is based on a simple observation: any victory that requires you to become something you despise isn't really a victory at all. We fight to preserve what we value, not to prove that we're stronger than everyone else." "And what do you value?" The question seemed to catch Morrison off guard, and I found myself leaning forward with interest. Her answer would reveal something fundamental about human civilization. "We value the possibility that any conflict can become the foundation for something better," she said finally. "We value the idea that intelligence and creativity can solve problems that force alone cannot. And we value the belief that every sentient species has something unique to contribute to the galaxy." Commander Valtherax rose from his biomechanical support system, a gesture that I recognized as one of profound respect among his species. "Captain Morrison, I formally request permission to transmit our conversation to the Korthak High Command. They must understand what we have encountered here." "Of course, Commander. We hope this can be the beginning of a new relationship between our species." As I watched this exchange, I realized that I was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans had not simply won a military victory, they had demonstrated an entirely new approach to interspecies relations that could reshape the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. 3 months after the battle that would forever change my understanding of warfare and civilization, I found myself aboard a joint human-Korthak research station orbiting a dead star in what had once been disputed territory. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Human modular construction techniques merged seamlessly with Korthak bioarchitecture to create something neither species could have achieved alone. As I prepared my final diplomatic report, I reflected on what I had witnessed during those transformative weeks. The implications of human military and social doctrine extended far beyond a single battle or even the relationship between two species. They challenged the fundamental assumptions upon which galactic civilization had been built for millennia. The research station bustled with activity as scientists from both species worked on projects that would have been inconceivable before their first encounter. In one laboratory, human engineers were learning to grow computational circuits from modified Korthak biotemplates. In another, Korthak technicians were adapting human artificial intelligence architectures to enhance their ship's decision-making capabilities.
But, the most significant developments were occurring in areas that had nothing to do with technology. I was reviewing preliminary research data when Captain Morrison approached my workstation in the station's central hub. Her uniform showed signs of wear from working alongside the various technical teams, and her expression carried the satisfaction of someone whose expectations had been exceeded. "Ambassador Kethvar," she said, using the formal title my species preferred in diplomatic contexts. "I wanted to thank you for documenting our initial encounters. Your reports have been invaluable in establishing protocols for future cooperation." I set aside my data tablets and studied her carefully. "Captain, I must confess that my reports have struggled to capture the true significance of what I have observed. My superiors find some of my conclusions difficult to accept." "Oh? What aspects specifically?" I activated my workstation's holographic display and called up sections of my preliminary report. "The tactical innovations your species demonstrated against the Korthak fleet were remarkable, but ultimately comprehensible. Superior strategy and innovative thinking have determined the outcome of military conflicts throughout history." Morrison nodded, waiting for me to continue. "What challenges my people's understanding is your behavior after achieving victory," I said. "You transformed military dominance into cooperative partnership with such ease that it appears to be instinctive rather than calculated." "It is instinctive," Morrison agreed. "Human military doctrine has evolved to view post-conflict relationships as more important than the conflicts themselves." I gestured toward the research laboratories where humans and Korthak were working together. "Yet the results suggest capabilities that extend far beyond military applications. The technological advances achieved through your collaboration in these few months exceed what either species might have accomplished independently over decades." "That's not surprising," Morrison said. "When you combine different approaches to problem solving, you often discover solutions that neither approach could have found alone." Her casual acceptance of this observation struck me as profound. "Captain, do you realize that your species has essentially solved the fundamental problem of interspecies competition?" Morrison looked genuinely puzzled. "I'm not sure I understand." I called up historical data on my display, showing conflict patterns across the galaxy over the past several thousand years. Throughout recorded history, advanced species have competed for resources, territory, and dominance. This competition has driven technological advancement, but it has also ensured that each species develops in isolation, limited by their own cognitive and cultural boundaries. I highlighted sections of the data that showed repeated cycles of conquest and subjugation. The result is a galaxy filled with civilizations that have reached plateaus in their development because they lack access to fundamentally different approaches to problem solving. Morrison studied the historical patterns with obvious interest. "So you're suggesting that cooperation might be more beneficial than competition for long-term development?" "I am suggesting that your species has demonstrated this beyond any possible doubt," I said. "The advances achieved through human-Korthak collaboration represent a new paradigm for galactic civilization." As if summoned by our conversation, Commander Valtherax entered the central hub, his carapace displaying the bright golds and blues that indicated contentment and intellectual satisfaction. Since beginning work on the research station, his coloring had become notably more vibrant, suggesting that the collaborative environment was having positive effects on Korthak psychology as well. "Ambassador Kethvar, Captain Morrison," he said in greeting. "I bring news that may interest you both. The Korthak High Command has received preliminary results from our joint research initiatives." "What's their assessment?" Morrison asked. Commander Valtherax's carapace shifted to patterns I had learned indicated profound satisfaction. "They are astounded. The technological capabilities we have developed through collaboration with human engineers exceed their most optimistic projections. They wish to expand the joint research program to include additional facilities and personnel." "That's wonderful news," Morrison said, though I detected something in her tone that suggested she had expected this outcome. "But there is more," Commander Valtherax continued. "The High Command has also received reports from other Korthak fleets that have encountered human vessels. In every case, the humans have responded to initial hostilities with tactical superiority followed by offers of cooperation." I found myself leaning forward with interest. "How many such encounters have there been?" 7 confirmed incidents across 4 different sectors, the commander replied. In each case, human forces achieved rapid victory through unconventional tactics, then immediately offered technical assistance and collaborative partnerships to their former enemies. Morrison looked thoughtful. I hope those encounters have been as productive as ours. More so, in several cases, Commander Valtherax said. One joint human-Korthak team has developed biomechanical interfaces that allow direct neural connection between organic and artificial computing systems. Another has created hybrid ship designs that combine the best features of both technological approaches. As I listened to this exchange, I realized that I was witnessing the emergence of something unprecedented in galactic history, a cascading transformation that was spreading from system to system as human philosophy encountered other civilizations. Captain Morrison, I said, your species is fundamentally altering the nature of galactic civilization without appearing to make any conscious effort to do so. She looked genuinely surprised.
We're not trying to change anything.
We're just responding to situations as they arise. That is precisely what makes your approach so revolutionary, I said. You treat cooperation as the natural outcome of any conflict, regardless of the initial hostilities involved.
Commander Valtherax's carapace displayed patterns of agreement. Ambassador Kethvar speaks truth.
Human behavior patterns suggest that your species views conflict as a temporary state that should be resolved as quickly as possible in favor of more productive relationships.
Morrison considered this observation carefully. I suppose that's accurate.
Human history teaches us that war is expensive, destructive, and ultimately pointless unless it leads to better conditions for everyone involved. Yet most species view military superiority as an end in itself, I pointed out. They seek dominance for its own sake, treating conquered peoples as resources to be exploited rather than partners to be cultivated.
That approach never made sense to us, Morrison said. If you defeat someone and, then, treat them as an enemy forever, you've created a permanent security threat. If you defeat someone and, then, help them become stronger and, more capable, you've gained a valuable ally. As I watched the easy interaction between Morrison and Commander Valtherax, I understood why my superiors found my report so difficult to accept. The humans had not simply won a military victory, they had redefined what victory meant in ways that rendered traditional concepts of conquest and subjugation obsolete. Captain, I said, I believe your species represents an evolutionary leap in interspecies relations that will reshape the entire galaxy. Morrison laughed, and the sound carried genuine amusement rather than arrogance. Ambassador, we're just trying to be practical.
It's easier to build things together than to fight over who gets to build them alone. In that moment, as I watched her casual dismissal of what might be the most significant development in galactic history, I finally understood why the humans had succeeded where every other species had failed. They had not set out to conquer the galaxy or impose their will on other civilizations. They had simply approached each situation with the assumption that cooperation was more valuable than dominance, and that assumption had become a self-fulfilling prophecy. 6 months later, I submitted my final report to the Zenthari Confederation Council. In it, I documented the emergence of what I termed the human paradigm, our approach to interspecies relations based on competitive cooperation rather than zero-sum conflict. The report described technological advances, diplomatic innovations, and military capabilities that had emerged from human-led collaborative efforts across 17 different star systems. But the most important section of my report dealt with something that could not be quantified or measured through conventional means: the gradual but unmistakable shift in galactic civilization toward cooperation, innovation, and mutual benefit that seemed to occur naturally in every system where humans had established a presence. The report concluded with a recommendation that the Zenthari Confederation immediately initiate diplomatic contact with human representatives, not from fear of their military capabilities, but from recognition that they represented a fundamental improvement in how intelligent species could relate to one another. As I prepared to transmit my findings, I reflected on the day I had first watched human warriors in action against the Korthak fleet. I had expected to witness a brief, savage demonstration of primitive tactics before the inevitable human defeat. Instead, I had discovered why the heavens themselves stood in awe of these remarkable beings. They had not conquered through superior force or advanced technology. They had triumphed by treating every conflict as an opportunity to build something better than what had existed before. In doing so, they had shown the galaxy a path toward a future that no species had previously dared to imagine.